Hello, everyone. My name is Patricia Miranda, and I'm the co-founder of the blog and YouTube channel Old School Lane. I cover all types of media on both podcast and video form. Some of my most viewed videos are when I talk about both Hey Arnold and As Told by Ginger. Examples include what makes As Told by Ginger a groundbreaking yet overlooked Nicktoon, the history of Harold the Jungle movie, and both of the reunion live streams where I had the cast and crew of As Told by Ginger and Hey Arnold. So what I'm about to present here is a presentation that I did for Offbeat Kiki's live stream, where they had a group of various online content creators who discuss about animation. And they went in different forms, whether it be with very serious or very silly topics. And so I presented my discussion on the importance of slice of life animation. Unfortunately, my audio was incredibly glitched out. And so nobody could hear anything on what I had to say about this. So they told me, why don't you just present your presentation on your YouTube channel? That way people can be able to watch all the work that you're able to put into it. And so I'm going to do that right here, right now. So I hope that you guys sit back, relax, and enjoy as I go over the importance of slice of life animation. So what is slice of life? Now, there are a lot of definitions to the term slice of life, but they all boil down to a depiction of everyday life in the form of media, whether it be through a book, a TV show, or a movie. The term slice of life may have originated around the 1890s when French playwright Jean Jullien was presenting his play The Serenade, where he was quoted by saying, "A play is a slice of life put on stage with art." And he also was quoted by saying, "Our purpose is to not create laughter, but thought." Now, to put it into proper context, now this play was written and presented around when the realism movement was still around, but a bit on the declining side. Now, to give a quick refresher on the movement for all you art historians and enthusiasts out there, or maybe for those who are just genuinely curious, the realism movement happened around from the mid 1850s all the way leading up into the early 1900s. It was a reaction to the Romanticism movement that had permeated around plays, paintings, sculptures, and literature around 30 to 40 years prior. The Romanticism movement emphasized emotion, appreciation of nature, and the importance of imagination. Their main protagonists in literature will be focusing on higher class society, such as nobles and royal families. If you wanted to see a painting during the Romanticism movement, some examples would probably be like Sunset by Eugene Delacroix, or if you want to read a book that came out during the Romanticism movement, then you can pick up any of Jane Austen's or the Bronte sisters' books. Now, the realism movement emphasized close, detailed, and comprehensive portrayal of reality, the importance of character over plot, characters having complex behaviors and motives, and social commentary on what was going on at the time. If you want to see a painting that was done around the realism movement, then an example would be The Stonebreakers by Gustave Courbet. Or if you want to read a book that came out during the realism movement, then check out any of Charles Dickens or Leo Tolstoy's books. What qualifies as slice of life? Now, it varies depending on who's the writer, what's their vision, and what time period it comes out in. But it more or less follows in this criteria. For the most part, slice of life presents stories and characters with very little plot, conflict, exposition, or endings. Very rarely, if at all, it features fantasy elements. Now, this can be a little tricky because sometimes slice of life can be compared to coming of age. The difference is that coming of age stories have their protagonists grow and change over time. An example of this would be David Copperfield from Charles Dickens's novel, where David Copperfield starts off where he's born, and then he grows up into being a young boy, and then he becomes a fully matured man. And we get to see his personal growth and his struggles. And we get to see it progress. And each chapter is a connection of the previous one. And everything that follows afterwards all connect. Slice of life stories, on the other hand, usually have no connection whatsoever for each chapter. An example of this would be with Astrid Lundgren's Pippi Longstocking books, where it focuses on Pippi and her friends Tommy and Annika in their adventures in Villa Villacula. Each chapter would have absolutely no connection to another. One chapter, it can be about Tommy, Annika visiting Pippi in her house, and she's making them breakfast. Another chapter could be about them going to school. Another chapter could be about them going to the circus. Another chapter could be about them having a picnic. They have absolutely zero connections with each other. Slice of life plots would usually be rounded up in a handful of sentences if you were to describe it to somebody. So it's about a girl going to school with her friends. It's about a village full of animals and their simple lives living in the countryside. It's about a group of kids who hang out and play video games. It's about a girl who wants to be a writer. They may be basic in terms of plot, but it's the characters that give them life, which goes into my next criteria. Sometimes slice of life can delve into harsh realities using ordinary people in ordinary places, whether that the harsh reality is about being popular or recognized by your school peers or going through body changes like puberty or moving to a new location. These common everyday problems are what people go through regardless of what generation you come from or what race, gender, nationality you are. People are flawed and they go through these problems. Other times, slice of life presents stories that deal with human relationships, both platonic and romantic. Because the characters are the focus of slice of life media, the relationship between them must play into the story's strengths. They have to be memorable, whether they be quirky or timid. Whether when we see these characters, we need to feel that they can be our friends or they remind us of our friends or of ourselves. If the characters do not work, then the whole package pretty much suffers. Now, let's talk about some examples of slice of life in animation. One of the most common takes place in a suburban area that is peaceful, calm, and full of life, with kids going out bike riding, hanging out in their clubhouse or tree fort, or playing games in the streets. Shows such as Doug, Arthur, and as of recently, Craig of the Creek emphasize the common setting of suburban life. Then you have the urban setting where there's a lot of loud noises, there's a lot of big crowds, and there's a lot of diverse locations. A perfect example of this would be Hey Arnold. Then there's the school setting. You have kids spending time mostly at school, hanging out at the library or at the cafeteria. They're playing outside, or they're dealing with common everyday struggles with tests and homework. Now, there are a lot of slice of life cartoons that are like this, but when I think about this particular structure of school life, slice of life cartoons, I think of Recess. Then we have the comedic slice of life animation. You have a lot of focus on humor, whether it be with gags, wordplay, puns, or physical comedy. While it does take place in a realistic setting like a neighborhood or a school, humor is the main focus. An example of this I can think of is Ed, Edd and Eddy. Now, this is where things get a little bit tricky. Adult sitcoms. Instead of it being about kids, it's about adults. And they're going through their common everyday struggles, marriage issues, paying bills, parental relationships, and much more. Shows such as King of the Hill, Bob's Burgers, F is for Family, and more are examples of this. Now, what makes a slice of life cartoon appealing? Well, That's a really interesting question, and I had to really dig deep into this. And one of the best articles that I was able to find on this was by, I'm going to butcher this name, and I apologize for that. Demand from the website The Artifice, and the article is called "The Appeal of Slice of Life." I'm going to leave it in the description below for you to check it out. It is a very long article, but it is very, very interesting. And they mostly talked about anime, but I would say that it kind of rounds it up the same. So the first appeal of slice of life is relaxation. Now, there's a term in anime when it comes to this called iyashike, or healing boom. Now, this form of slice of life anime came out around the mid 90s, and it would provide people a break from the affections of everyday commodities with a form of personal space. Leading into relaxation is atmosphere. You notice that when you watch a lot of slice of life media, whether it be with cartoons, like TV shows or even movies, they tend to have very light colors. There's light blues, light reds, yellows, greens, and whites. And also, you notice that they have very slow pace in terms of their animation. Now, the colors definitely make up for it. And another thing that makes up for it is that the music would also play into this as well. Now, the music is very melancholic, it's very lighthearted, it's upbeat, it's nostalgic, it's heartfelt. And not only that, but music can also help tell the story. And the reason for that is because when the characters are on the screen, sometimes they would say nothing. They would say very little words, and they would just be like sitting alongside with the protagonist or with their friends, and they would just be like keeping each other company or just looking out on a view, whether it be a sunset or maybe they're at the beach or something. And the very few words that they do say is very impactful. And not only that, but it's impactful because of its wholesomeness or its sense of cruel reality. Now, very similar to the animation and the music and the pace, the reason why a lot of people really like slice of life animation is because it tackles problems in a very grounded and down to earth approach. Now, I read an interesting article on The Guardian that came out around 2015 called "Dystopia is Done, Fantasy is Finished: Why Realism is on the Rise of Young Adult Fiction." And this was written by Much Books. They were discussing about how while Katniss Everdeen from the Hunger Games was a great protagonist, her actions and dystopian setting were never relatable. Fantasy and dystopian novels such as the Harry Potter series and the Divergent series became popular over the course of the decade from the 2000s to the early 2010s. We'll go a little bit more into this a little later on, but for now, I want to focus on a few years later around the mid 2000s. This was when realistic fiction made a huge comeback. Books such as The Fault of Our Stars, The Sky is Everywhere, and I'll Give You the Sun had resonated with a lot of teenagers and young adults, with talks of taking tests, peer pressure, and the gain and loss of family and friends. Slice of life animation delivers on this, and it caters to an audience who are looking for realism. The tone, for the most part, are both whimsical and realistic, and the characters' quirks and their personalities is what gives it its appeal. It's a very inviting presence that is very easy to get into and get yourself invested in. Now, I think that another reason why that slice of life cartoons are very appealing is because going into like anime once again, there's another genre of anime that they were talking about in this article, and it was called Nichi Jokai, or everyday type. Now, the popularity of this genre of anime started around the 2000s, and many people accredit it to the 1999 Yokama manga Azumanga Daioh, created by Kiyohiko Azuma for this. Now, for those who don't know, the premise of the show is about five girls who go to high school, and the characters is what makes the show really, really memorable because they're quirky and they're whimsical, but the problems are realistic. I actually did an entire podcast on Azumanga Daioh, so you can go check that out once you have the chance. Now, this started a trend around the early 2000s with other anime such as K-On!, Hidamari Sketch, and Lucky Star. Now, the wholesomeness is definitely a major reason why slice of life animation is very appealing. There are some exceptions to where slice of life animation can be a bit cynical and harsh, but for the most part, the wholesome nature lures people into a familiar and comforting setting as a complement to the music, atmosphere, and characters. And while realistic films, plays, comic strips were around for a long, long time, whenever people bring up the golden age of slice of life animation, they always go over to the 90s and early 2000s. Almost every network had their own slice of life animated show to present, whether it be from Nickelodeon, MTV, Disney, Fox Kids, PBS, etc. Each of them were able to present their characters and stories in realistic and groundbreaking approaches in unique ways. Doug, Recess, Fillmore, Arthur, and The Weekenders would take people into the mindset of a group of kids, and they would be either in a school setting or they would be outside of school, hanging out, going to various places, and dealing with common everyday problems. And then you have shows such as Beavis and Butthead and Daria, which were social commentaries of suburban life and social conformity presented in two completely different ways for teenagers and adults. Then you have Pepper Ann as told by Ginger and Braceface, and it puts you into the perspective of a teenage girl going through school, puberty, and family problems. And then you have Hey Arnold, which gave us a group of kids and adults with various everyday problems in a large suburban setting, delving with subtle references to alcoholism, substance abuse, peer pressure, family neglect, references of war, weight issues, and social isolation. And it's true that there were a lot of other cartoons other than Slice of Life that permeated throughout the 90s. There was superhero cartoons such as Batman, Superman, and X-Men, the animated series. We had the animated sitcoms such as The Simpsons and The Critic. We had the wacky, gross-out cartoons like Ren and Stimpy and Cow and Chicken. But Slice of Life cartoons had their major spot in the lineup for over a decade and a half, which leads me over to the decline. Now, a lot of people have been debating on this for a very, very long time. When did slice of life cartoons die out and why? Now, there's a lot of factors to those who felt that it kind of died around the mid to late 2000s. Now, I'm just going to preface this by saying that this is my opinion on why this happened. It's not based off of like, oh, this is the official reason on why. There's no definitive answer. This is just from research and the fact that I was a teenager around the 2000s and I kind of saw this firsthand. So again, this is based off of my personal experiences and from doing a little bit of research to kind of like put things into context. So again, take it with a grain of salt. So one of the reasons why I felt that slice of life cartoons were kind of in a decline around the 2000s was because the audience was growing older. Adult Swim, Comedy Central, and Fox were dominating the lineup with shows such as South Park, Futurama, Family Guy, C-Lab 2021, Aqua Teen Hunger Force, Home Movies, and The Venture Brothers. And another reason why was because that taste in animation had drastically changed in over a decade. And not only was adult cartoons becoming more prominent, but anime was becoming more prominent. Now, it is true that anime have been around for a few decades prior in America when Fred Ladd, who was a television producer for Universal and NBC Enterprises, bringing in shows and movies such as Astro Boy Boy, Gigantor, Kimba the White Lion, and even Sailor Moon. But it wasn't until around the mid to late 90s and 2000s in which anime became massive. Sailor Moon, Dragon Ball Z, Digimon, Toonami was appearing with shows such as Cowboy Bebop, Yu Yu Hakusho, Inuyasha, Trigun, and then you have Kids WB with Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, Mew Mew Power, Sonic X, and One Piece. In addition to all of these networks bringing in anime, you also had Disney acquiring the licensing rights for Studio Ghibli, partly thanks to John Lasseter and his close relationship with Hayao Miyazaki, one of the founders of Studio Ghibli. And so because of this, films such as My Neighbor Totoro, Kiki's Delivery Service, Princess Mononoke, and Spirited Away were available for a mainstream Western audience. And because of this, a lot of show creators became inspired by anime to create their own animated series. Examples include Gendy Tartakovsky's Samurai Jack, Kristen Hui's Shaolin Showdown, Glenn Murakami and Sam Register's Teen Titans, and Michael DiMartino and Brian Konietzko's Avatar: The Last Airbender, and so much more. Speaking of, there's a large abundance of superhero cartoons that came out around the same time. Because of the massive popularity of Blade and Spider-Man reaching the theaters and gaining a new generation of comic book fans, we were able to get a lot more superhero cartoons such as Batman Beyond, Justice League, The Batman, Static Shock, X-Men Evolution, and of course, as mentioned before, Teen Titans. Now, this is still very prominent to this day, where there's a lot of homages, references, and Easter eggs to anime. You can even watch this in like newer shows such as Amphibia, The Owl House, and Jellystone, in which they have all of these video game and anime references. And the reason why was because the creators of these shows grew up with anime because it became so abundantly available. And so they were able to put their influences into these shows. And it kind of never went away in the course of 20-something years. So when people look back on these slice of life cartoons, now that we have all of this stuff together, it's that, you know, when comparing it, it seems that slice of life cartoons were just too slow, boring, and uninteresting for this particular audience. Now, there's an article that I read called Hey Arnold Series is Good Television, and this was written by Jimmy Akin from Decent Films. Again, I'm going to leave the link in the description below. So I'm just going to quote from what they said about Hey Arnold. Hey Arnold is a cartoon produced for the children's network Nickelodeon by the Sneosh Animation House. Unlike most cartoons being produced today, it is both low-key and entertaining. Most cartoons today strive to be entertaining by throwing a mile-a-minute plot, dialogue, animation, and jokes at the audience, example being of this Animaniacs. Cartoons that take the other tack strive to be low-key, PBS's Arthur to be their exemplar. The trouble is, such cartoons tend to be boring. In an effort to be kid-friendly and safe, they lose their storytelling energy and humor. I'm going to say that one more time. The trouble is, such cartoons tend to be boring, and they lose their storytelling energy and humor. I know this from personal experience that I've seen, and I was told by a lot of people that I knew who felt this exact notion. Now, story time, you know. So I was in high school around 2001, and I was hanging out with a group of teenagers who were like faux goth. So they were like dressed in like this Hot Topic gear, and they were listening to Evanescence and Green Day, and they were like reading off any book that was written by Jonan Vasquez. Like, you know, Johnny the Homicidal Maniac and Squee were just really, really popular amongst the group of people that I was hanging out with. And so they were really into Invader Zim, but I was still watching As Told by Ginger. And so when I was talking to them about it, they were not remotely interested in watching As Told by Ginger. And they said, why would I watch a show about somebody who's going through school issues when I myself am going through school issues? You know, I need an escape. I need to watch something that's fun. And well, I mean, for a lot of people, they felt that same way. And again, you know, this is going into my personal speculation. So again, grain of salt. I think another reason why people just needed that sense of escapism was because I went to high school post 9/11, and there was a lot of news going on regarding about, like, you know, the towers going down, and, you know, this whole patriotic thing that was being blared in, you know, the news reports, and, you know, weapons of mass destruction and terrorism with Iraq and Iran. And then we were going into war. And so because people just were really seeing the news left and right about all this stuff, they just needed a sense of escapism. And you know, stuff such as like anime and all of these action cartoons that were like being fun and you know, catering to an older audience was really you know, appealing to a lot of teenagers and adults at the time. And not to mention that around the same time, video games were a very similar thing. So I like to always compare slice of life animation to 3D platformers, in which back in the 90s, they were everywhere. You had Super Mario 64, Banjo-Kazooie, Jak and Daxter, Ratchet and Clank, Sly Cooper. And so, you know, around like the late 90s, all the way up into like the mid 2000s, you had like all of these 3D platformers, and, you know, you got to like have all these collectibles, and you had these big, expansive worlds, and you had this great music and this great atmosphere. And then around the, or like around the mid 2000s, MMORPGs such as World of Warcraft became really, really popular. And then first person shooters such as Halo and Call of Duty became really, really popular. And so, other than just like your mainstream Mario title, 3D platformers just kind of died out. And I think that, you know, kind of like a similar thing happened with like slice of life cartoons, in which, like, you know, because there was just an abundance of a lot of other animated shows that were like really getting popular, and, you know, really catering to us, you know, a larger crowd, and, you know, people finding slice of life cartoons to be just too boring or just too realistic when they just wanted escapism, it just kind of died out. Or did it? Now, there's a reason why I have this question mark. It's not a typo, by the way. Now, I happen to be a huge fan of a YouTuber known as Derek Alexander, aka Stop Skeletons from Fighting. And they did this really, you know, interesting video discussing about how ukulele was a massive failure because, according to his opinion, you know, there was a reason why 3D platformers died out. It was because he felt that it was outdated. And, you know, the emphasis of ukulele was incredibly outdated. And so then he did a follow-up video, which I thought was really, really interesting. And that was called, where 3D platformers, they didn't die out, they became hybrids and they evolved. So he was talking about how, you know, with Jak and Daxter, for example, in the first Jak and Daxter game, it was a strict 3D platformer where you did a lot of collecting power cells and precursor orbs and scout flies, and you went over to like various worlds to collect all of these items and then bring them in so that you can be able to open up other worlds. Again, going into like Super Mario 64 or Banjo-Kazooie. But then Jak 2 came out, and that game was not only mixing in the 3D platforming, but it also introduced guns, and it expanded the world where you get to travel around and do missions and side missions, and you get to be able to drive in cars because it takes place like further into the future. So he was saying that Jak and Daxter, in order for it to like cater to an older audience, they had to mix in the 3D platformers with the sandbox genre because Grand Theft Auto 3 was like a hugely popular and influential title for teenagers and adults. Then going into Ratchet and Clank, where he was talking about how, like even with like going commando, where it was like throwing in some like RPG elements where you got to like build up your hit points, and then you got to make your weapons stronger. But at the same time, there was a lot of 3D platforming in there. And then with Sly Cooper, there was a lot of 3D platforming in there as well, but there was also stealth put into the game, influenced by games such as the Metal Gear Solid games and Splinter Cell. So he was saying that the 3D platformers never died off, they just evolved. So it had gotten me thinking, maybe the reason why we haven't really seen a lot of these slice of life cartoons like for like around the mid 2000s or like around the 2010s, maybe they didn't really die off, maybe they just evolved. Because personally, to me, before I started doing this research, I was thinking, other than Arthur, they pretty much died off. So what happened? And so I was doing some research, and I found this really interesting article from Bubble Blabber, which is a website that posts up reviews, blog reviews, and podcasts and videos. And so they were reviewing Hair of the Jungle movie, and they were praising the film's callback to its melancholic mood, slow pace, and atmosphere, setting, and music, saying that he hadn't seen anything like it in modern cartoons since Steven Universe. Wait, that got me thinking, Steven Universe. So I decided to rewatch Steven Universe again to kind of like, put it into proper context. And I was saying, wow, if you were to take away the sci-fi and fantasy elements and the whole Crystal Gems persona, let's do a checkbox of things that you would see in a typical slice of life cartoon. Okay, you would have light colors, check. Beautiful atmospheric music, check. You would have realistic problems such as peer pressure, depression, stress, and family issues, double check. So essentially, if you were to take away the whole sci-fi and fantasy elements from Steven Universe, you essentially have a slice of life cartoon in its foundation. And so I was thinking, maybe they did kind of evolve. So if we were to take a look at something like Adventure Time, well, I mean, it's true that Adventure Time started off as like a silly little comedy with Finn and Jake and, their crazy adventures together. And so you could kind of say that maybe if you were to take away, the whole post-apocalyptic land of Ooh, and if you were to take away, like the fact that it's like mostly, kind of like leaning more towards like fantasy and that kind of stuff. If you were to take in like the core of it with like the colors and the music and the realistic problems, then again, that could be a proper foundation. But nowadays, we do see more slice of life cartoons coming in, and they started coming around, as mentioned earlier, within like the mid 2010s, when people just needed a sense of realism in their media. Shows such as Clarence, Craig of the Creek, and The Loud House are calling back to slice of life cartoons from years past because they just needed a sense of realism in their media. People were hungry for this, and now we're slowly getting it again. And so I want to ask one last question right before we conclude this. Why are slice of life cartoons or movies, why are they still important? Well, they're able to tell stories, showcase characters, and have a familiar and comforting setting that anyone can gravitate to. It's a relaxing, calming, and soothing experience that have complex and relatable characters going through everyday struggles and triumphs. I'd like to close this presentation off by going full circle with discussing about a French artist named Jean Jullien. No, not to be confused with the playwright. He was actually named after the playwright. He recently did a showcase called Home Slice, where he did paintings of everyday Monday events from his wife and kids while they were under lockdown during the COVID-19 pandemic. The article that reviewed the showcase, Juxtapoz Magazine, was quoted by saying, "What is nice about the overall story of Home Slice is that you can relate to the daily motions within the work. We take walks, convene for lunch, invent chores, play, and sometimes just sit and talk or do nothing at all." These mundane moments become profound with Jullien, who needs together both his words and paintings together for a satisfying universal experience, end quote. Again, I'll leave all of this stuff in the link in the description so you can go check out Jean Jullien's Home Slice. Now, as the old saying goes, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And seeing and experiencing realism is needed in our lives. Slice of life animation is a great showcase of that. All right, so that is it with my presentation. I hope that you guys enjoy it. So if you are interested in checking out the other presentations done by the other cartoon reviewers, then I'll leave Offbeat Kiki's video on their live stream in the link below. There are timestamps so you can be able to watch every single one of them. Please skip mine because, like I said before, the audio was very glitched, but everybody else's was great. And they all did a phenomenal job, and they had very fun and very serious topics of, you know, all types of discussions of animation. So please, please check it out. If you are new to this channel, then please, if you can, subscribe and check out my other works. Like I said before, I talk a lot about slice of life here in Old School Lame. I've done a lot of videos and podcasts on Hey Arnold, As Told by Ginger. I did some on Doug. I talked about Azumanga, and I'm planning on doing some more. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this presentation. Thank you so much for watching it, and I hope to see you around soon. Take care.